Hi, I'm Josh Cadillac, and welcome to my podcast, Know Your Shit. I've been blessed to see great success, as well as seeing the bottom up close and personal in 2008. And if there's one lesson I've learned, is that if you want to have success and differentiate yourself from everyone else out there, you need to know your shit. As a successful real estate and crypto investor and an educator, it drives me insane that people do not immerse themselves in their craft. Everyone is so busy advertising and testing new sales techniques, they forget the most important thing, the product. Here I want to talk to the folks that got this right, the most successful people in the world in every industry. Bring them to you and find out what they learned in their business that made it great. When you listen to my podcast, you will know for sure that the topics and experts we have on have one thing in common. They know their shit. And welcome to Know Your Shit podcast, where our knowledge and pride in what we do drives us to be excellent. My name is Josh Cadillac, and once again, I'm in the driver's seat today as we learn how to stop just chasing paychecks and how to start closing customers for life. We have a great show for you, and that's because of the great guest we have, Mr. Todd Holzman. Todd, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Josh, for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Todd, why don't you tell our listeners what it is that you do?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm the founder of Holzman Leadership, and I have been a leadership development professional for over 30 years now. And my whole mission in life and my firm's mission is to inspire and equip people to be able to have honest and effective conversations with each other about things that really matter, both in and outside of work.
And what got you started doing that, Todd?
Okay, Dr. Cadillac, we'll get a little Freudian here maybe. I actually think it starts when I was a kid. I remember this, I've been asked this question: how did you become obsessed with Candor? And I still remember the story. I'm 7 years old. We go to my grandparents' 35th wedding anniversary, and we come back to the house, and my grandma asks me, how did you like the party? And I tell her, I didn't like it very well. And she says, why? And I said, because you kept calling Grandpa an idiot all night. I don't think you love him. And my grandma was cool with it, but my mom, not so cool with it. So she pulls me to the side of the room and says, what are you doing talking to your grandma that way? And I say, but you always told him to be honest. And she said, not that honest. You know, so at a very early, and that created a lot of confusion for me as a kid, because my dad was always teaching me, be honest, speak the truth. And then the first moment that I at least recall doing it, you know, it goes badly. And I just grew up with this, I didn't articulate it this way, with this kind of honesty dilemma. If I said what I thought, often it wouldn't go well. People would get upset at me. But if I didn't say what I thought, I would feel badly. And I was always kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And I lived with this until I was about 24. And I started realizing when I was in grad school at Columbia that a lot of people really suffer from the same thing. And that became the focus of my work, is how do we help people transcend this very human honesty dilemma that I think all of us experience.
Sure. What do you like best about doing this, Todd?
That's a great question. What do I like best? I think what I like best is helping people do things they thought were impossible. I think that's what I find probably the most gratifying. Because by and large, people avoid saying what they think is true when they think it's going to create some kind of bad outcome. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I work with a lot of, we work at all levels inside of companies, right? From literally CEO, top 5 pharma company in the world, to whom I'm the team coach, all the way down to first line sales reps, for example, and their managers. And like, you look at sales reps, for example, it's like, oh, I'm so scared of kind of challenging this particular oncologist who I'm trying to get to buy my therapy. Because if I do, they may get upset with me. It'll hurt the relationship. Then they won't want to see me anymore. Then it's going to hurt my sales. And I'm under a lot of pressure to get results. And to help people to realize that a lot of things that they're afraid of won't actually come true if they know
Sure.
how to handle this very honest conversation in a very effective way. And then they do it, and then all these bad things don't happen, and good things happen, often the very opposite of what they expected. Like,
Sure.
the person was very open to me, our relationship is better, my sales are increasing. So I think that's probably the essence of it, is helping people do things that they thought were simply impossible, and then how it lights them up. Not just in terms of their results, but how much more positive they are about everything. It's this ability to have honest conversations is kind of like a superpower that I think anybody can access. Like in the martial arts world, for people like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, anybody knows anything about that, if you learn that particular martial art, it's like having a superpower, and anybody can learn it. And I think for leadership, the ability to have honest conversations is basically the same thing.
Gotcha. And so where do you think all the successes come from for you?
I mean, you can never, Josh, you can never discount some good fortune, right?
Sure.
But I also believe that, fortune favors the persistent,
Okay.
So I think,
The bold and persistent, let's say that.
yeah, I know. The saying is, fortune favors the bold or the brave, and I agree with that. I think
Brave
a
enough to be
couple.
persistent, yeah.
Yeah, that's well said. I think it's been my obsessive focus on this particular topic. There are a lot of pretty good books out there on the subject or similar subjects. You have Courageous Conversations, Difficult Conversations, Radical Candor, yada yada yada. But my team and I, so I have a 13-person global faculty, we have studied this subject, I think, more intensely than anybody else has in the world. People, when we train people in workshops or in individual coaching sessions, people are bringing to us real conversations that they've had that didn't produce the results they wanted. So with a customer, with a colleague, with somebody on their team, with their manager above them, whomever, okay? And they either bring to us a conversation where they didn't get the results they wanted, or they share with us how they would have a conversation, and they're anticipating they won't get the results that they want. And we have a particular tool that helps us get access to how they really behave in those situations without us having to be in the room. It's a research tool that I appropriated from this famous organizational psychologist, Chris Argyris from Harvard, that I turned into a developmental tool. And so we get access. It's almost like being in the room, and we know what they're saying, and we know what the other people are saying. And what's very interesting, when you look at, we've analyzed tens of thousands of these conversations. And when you look at these conversations, what you notice is that in every single instance where someone's having a conversation that hasn't produced the results they wanted, there is always something that they are doing or not doing that is preventing them from getting better results. And when you look at this large sample of conversational data, everybody has the same gaps. Everybody seemingly falls into the same traps, regardless of the company they're in, the culture they're from, or the country where they reside. And they're blind to the things that they're doing that are preventing them from getting better results. So part of the success has come from being a total geek on this subject and just studying it intensely and doing nothing else. And then trying to figure out, well, how do we help people have better conversations? And experimenting with tens of thousands of people, of course, over the course of 30 years now, okay, with people all over the globe. And a lot of the ideas that I thought I hoped would work didn't. Things that I didn't think would work did. And what we started to realize, there seems to be just a small handful of algorithms that, if you can learn them well, will enable you to have a very honest and effective conversation about something that really matters in ways that will help you make progress on the problem you're talking about, or the issue, the challenge, whatever, but also deepen the relationship between us. And usually it's kind of one or the other. I talk about the issue, I hurt the relationship. I preserve the relationship, I don't talk about the issue. And so through this intense analysis, we have discovered things that really work. And we didn't do it in a lab. We did it with people in the field around the real conversations they had to have with real people. Again, customers, colleagues, managers, their bosses, their teams, all of it. And then we were able to look at what actually worked and what didn't. And then we developed a methodology, a way to develop this capability, because the people's ability to even just express the truth of what they think, it's a really underdeveloped muscle, I think, in almost all of humanity. It's like we don't get trained in this stuff. You know, like as little kids, we should probably get trained in managing our finances, right? We don't get trained in that, you know, and we talk to each other every day about important things, but we don't get trained in how to do that well, you know, and so we developed a methodology that isn't some big intellectual theoretical exercise. It's no, Josh, bring me a conversation we'll have with somebody about something that's important to you, maybe to your business, and that where you're afraid you're not going to be able to get the results that you want. And we'll very quickly help you be able to see, okay, here's what you do by default that's working, and that's not working. And then we'll be able to teach you something that really works in the real world. And then we'll realistically practice what you're going to say, simulating the situation you're going to be in. So it's not a lot of blah, blah, blah theory. It's a little bit of theory and very, very intense practice so that you're ready to get out there and produce effective conversational behavior under pressure. So I think it's the intense study of the subject I don't think anybody else can match, but also it's developing a methodology so that people can actually learn it and then apply it relatively immediately.
I think I know your answer to this next question, but I'm curious to what you'll say. What do you think makes you good at this?
I'm curious to know what you think my answer is going to be. What do you think my answer is going to be? Can I stall?
Because you said it already. Because you're a total geek on this. You've given your life to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, you know, I was listening to Douglas Murray. No, thank you, Josh. I think that's part of it. But I guess the question is, it's one thing, I guess, maybe to learn something about a subject matter, but without having real passion for it, then I don't think it ends up amounting to anything, you know. And I was listening to Douglas Murray this morning, and he was asking about why he was obsessed with reporting on a particular subject, and he said, because I hate lying. I hate lies. He says, I strongly dislike lying is the quote. And I very much care about the pursuit of truth. And I think that's somehow just in me. I've always, yeah, I think so. And I think that probably comes from mom and dad. And you know, I see all these also, but then when you work with all these people and you start to see that there's this incredible gap in almost everyone. A lot of people think they're good at this stuff, but when you, and to varying degrees we are, because we all talk all the time, right? But a lot of people think they're good drivers because they drive all the time, and yet we see the accident rate. So, and I have seen how much people suffer from their inability to have an honest conversation.
Sure.
And it bothers me because I think it's correctable. So I have somebody, you know, probably like you. I mean, I also have people who coach me, and I was talking to one of the people who coaches me, and she was telling me a story of how her mom had some issues with her father, right? Whatever those were when she was growing up. And at some point, the issues were bad enough that she divorced him. Then 30 years later, her father dies, and her mother, I don't know if it was at the funeral or after the funeral, but somewhere around there, says something like the following to my coach. It's like, this was the love of my life. And what I realize now is that I never, ever told him what was wrong. I bottled it up inside. And so 30 years go by where you could have lived with the love of your life, and then 30 years later, you look back at it and you have regret.
Yeah.
And it's like, sorry, am I allowed to curse on this thing?
By all means.
Well, it is called Know Your Shit podcast, right? It's like, fuck, man, that doesn't have to be that way. Right. And I saw the problems in my own family. My mother, the difficulty in expressing herself to my father, and the ability to be articulate about things that you care about is so important, because otherwise it could be just swatted away so easily by somebody else who is smarter and more articulate. I look at my partner, friends of mine, who they can't have a real relationship with their brother and sister because they can't bring their authentic self to the conversation because it's going to be rejected in some way. And then if you can't bring your real self to a conversation, you can't actually have a relationship. It's just a superficial transaction around people who happen to be related. And then people always tend to, and I saw at work, how many managers were avoiding telling their people how they're performing. And then their people don't perform better. And then their people end up working at, I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with, working at a Walgreens or something, but not if you're a 30-year trained engineer who never got good feedback on your performance. And now you're just screwed because somebody has deprived you of that learning in the name of being nice. Or how,
I clearly remember reading Joe Torre's book about Derek Jeter. And they at some point they were nervous to go to Jeter and tell him that defensively he wasn't very good going to, I think it was his right side, or maybe it was to one side. And so they put it off. And finally, like, the GM Cashman says, all right, we got to do this. So he has dinner with Jeter. And when he tells Jeter, Jeter's angry. Not that they didn't tell him, but that they waited so long to tell him so that he knew what direction he could get better at, where he needed to improve. And it's exactly ties in with what you're saying right now, is the delay of the honesty keeps us from achieving the results that we're capable of.
And with Josh, I didn't read the book, but I am a Yankee fan because I live in New York. Do you remember what their reasoning was for avoiding the conversation and putting it off? Like, what did they say in the book? Yeah,
they thought that Jeter would be, angry, and that, he didn't take. They felt he wouldn't take criticism well, and so, like, he wasn't a guy that took well to criticism, I think was kind of what they say. It's been a while since I've read it.
No, it's okay, but that's typical, right? We think whatever, insert negative reaction, explanation of negative reaction.
Totally,
right?
It was totally a negative reaction they were trying to avoid. Totally.
So let's talk about that. This is a great example. So let's talk about that for a second. So first of all, there could be a way that Jeter, maybe they tried to give him feedback before, and he didn't respond well to it. That's potentially the case, right?
Sure.
But these things are much more nuanced than people realize. I mean, look at the irony. In the name of not upsetting him, we're going to do something which guarantees he gets upset at us, right? So the very thing they were trying to avoid is the very thing that they got, number one. Number two, I can understand why he's upset by not receiving the feedback. I mean, and probably for two reasons. And one's obvious and one's maybe less obvious. The obvious one is I'm a high-performing guy. I want to perform at my best. So if there's something that I'm doing that's preventing me from doing that, it's like I need to know that. The reason I was able to get to this high-level position is because I'm an incredible learner and a high performer. And I'm not, so that's the first thing. So you've deprived me. So I've had this time period where I could have been a lot better than I was, and you stole that from me.
Yep.
But the other thing is the kind of implicit, now we're warming up, I needed a Jeter story, is the implicit, insult, Josh. Because what are they implicitly saying about him by not giving him the feedback?
That he's not a big enough man to take it.
Exactly. So he's soft and weak. right? So it's like, you're so fragile that if we give you some feedback that you can't go to your right, you're going to crumble like a little baby. And it's disrespectful in that way. Now, I don't think they're intending to be disrespectful, but by any means. But this is the thing, dude. I've got like over 30,000 instances, just like the Jeter story, that we look at, and through all the training and coaching that we've done. But this is what's happening every single day inside of companies. People have reasons that you and I would both be sympathetic with, right? But why they're not having the conversation. But if not always, almost always, the cost of not having the conversation exceeds by a mile the cost of having the conversation. And what I'm trying to do, and the way that people, and what I'm trying to say is, if you can learn how to do it well, you won't have to avoid it so much.
Right.
It's a learnable competence.
Rather than learning the avoidance skills that we practice so much, if you would just learn to do the thing, have the difficult conversation in a better way, you would put yourself in a position where they would not be nearly as many conversations that seem to be that difficult, because you're just better at having. And
that's the thing, right? So, I mean, I took a shot at becoming like an amateur race car driver at one point, and I moved to Vegas. I bought a car too, became a member at a racing club and all this stuff. And dude, I was scared to death of that track. It was the most frightening thing in the world. But as I got better, I became less fearful. It was simply a matter of more skill. But here's the thing about this, and this is why I'm writing this book right now. Provisional title, Candor, or Getting to Candor, because a lot of the ideas, a lot of the advice that passes as good ideas, if implemented properly, actually backfire. So this is the thing. So remember I said with the Jeter conversation, maybe they actually gave him feedback before and he was defensive about it, right? So there's a justification for why they've been avoiding it.
Yeah.
But maybe, and I would say highly likely, let's say that actually happened, it was the way they were doing it that created the defensiveness. But they concluded, well, it's not what we did, it's his defensive response.
It's obviously him. Yeah, no, it's obviously
it can't
him.
Be me. You know what I mean?
Me.
And this is the thing. This is what I said. When we look at all these case studies we've analyzed, it's always them to some degree, but they have a blind spot around it. So, for example, one of the things that so many of we're like the aftermarket for this particular coaching methodology. One of the things that thousands of leaders that we have trained have been trained in before we've trained them and had to untrain them from this is question-based coaching. So you see it in things like called the grow model, the round model. Basically, what a lot of managers in these big companies are learning is, so Josh, you work for me. Listen, first rule you have to understand what I'm being trained by. I shouldn't tell you what I think, right? And I certainly should never tell you what I think you should do. You've got to discover that for yourself. Because, if you could figure it out for yourself, then you're going to be more bought into it, right? And so what I'm going to do, Josh, is I'm going to ask you questions. So, Josh, let's say you were doing it, Josh, do you think, what do you think about X? And do you think you could do this better? And what about this? And never, ever revealing any of my cards. And there's something valuable in that it's good to get other people thinking versus us always having to think for them, right, as their managers.
Sure.
It's because we want our people to kind of stand on their own 2 feet, right, and think for themselves. And these questions could be helpful. But part of developing people is sometimes sharing our perspective, our experiences. So if I'm now not allowed to share my perspective, my experiences, my insights onto the current situation, if this person has a blind spot, then all I'm doing is interrogating them at the end of the day. And what we sometimes see is that the people being inflicted with this questioning methodology, they kind of like it for a time, right? Because the manager's being less intrusive and more hands off. So it's kind of like, okay, I kind of get to do what I want. But eventually, all the competition's avoided. But eventually, the dissatisfaction with it, the pleasure, the engagement scores go down. And the performance of the people goes down too, because they're being left too much to their own devices. And
sure.
And so it could have been that they were taught something that simply didn't work, Jeter had a defensive response, and they blamed him, and it justified their further avoidance.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. So I hear you talking a lot about your coaching, and I know you have a book coming out and all this. Is there a tool that you'd have that you'd suggest to our listeners, whether one of yours, or if there's not something you think that would be a fit for our listeners, where they should go to get more on this? Obviously, your book is a great resource, but I know that's still coming.
Yeah, can I say one thing first there, before that I think will be useful? So I guess what I want to say to your audience, I mean, yes, obviously one of the key takeaway messages from all of this is the ability to have honest and effective conversations. It's a learnable skill. So naturally you would ask me, okay, so what should actually one do as an example? Or is there a tool and there are resources we could provide them? And, the answer to that is, absolutely yes. And I'll share with you where they can get some more resources.
Fantastic.
But I guess the question is why should, your podcast is called what? Know Your Shit? Is that what, right? So it's like, why should anybody give a shit about this topic? And I think it's one of these things that people don't think about enough. Sure. And the reason is, first of all, in life as in business, we can't solve any problem that we can't talk to each other about openly and honestly. And then secondly, if you look at all the psychological literature, people's psychological well-being rises and falls on their ability to express themselves authentically. Every measure of psychological well-being that clinicians care about, self-esteem, mood, and the ability to get one's basic needs met, are either specifically correlated with or directly affected by the ability of someone to express the truth of what they think in their interactions with other people. And then, so it's vital to our thriving and to the success of our businesses and the effectiveness of our organizations. But it's vital to our thriving in and outside of work. And it's something that none of us have learned to do. And I would say almost all of us have huge blind spots. And so I would say if you want to improve the quality of your life, improve your relationships, improve your impact at work, whether it's through interactions with customers or whatever, there actually is one thing you could focus on. And if you get really good at it, it's going to transform maybe everything. So that's, that was kind of a response to your earlier question or why I'm so passionate about it, because that's what I have seen time and time again. Like a sales manager who's been avoiding having the conversation with their sales rep about how micromanaging they were. And in the meantime, they were micromanaging them about their micromanagement, and the performance was horrible. And then he realizes, well, I'm role modeling the very behavior I don't want her to emulate. That's causing a problem with her sales reps. And then I change it, and I actually finally have an honest conversation. Like, you've got very experienced sales reps, and you're micromanaging them. Here's why I say that. Here's my data for that. And I think what it's doing is turning them off, and you're not getting access to their good thinking. What do you think? He said that to her. 6 months later, she was one of the top 5 sales managers in the whole United States for a top 5 U.S. pharma, and her sales growth was beating everyone's. And this is the power of what is seemingly kind of a small conversation. And in terms of, so do you want me to share with a resource where your audience can get more stuff, or do you want me to share with you like an example of a technique?
Well, I was actually going to ask you for a resource and then maybe a sneak peek at what they could expect from that.
Okay. So your audience can email us at holzman.com/getting-to-candor. Okay, so holzman.com/getting-to-candor. They do that. We got a bunch of stuff that's for them and stuff that can help them start bootstrapping their way into into more effectiveness during their important conversations. In terms of a resource, in terms of a technique, here's how we start with everyone. So this is how your audience could start. So think about an important conversation you want to have. Okay, divide a piece of paper into a left and right column. In the right column, what I want you to do is write down what you would actually say, like a script in a play, and what they would actually say, what you would anticipate they would actually say. This is straight from Chris Argyris from Harvard. And then the left column, write down what you were thinking and feeling but wouldn't say. And I think simply the act of doing that, having the conversational data here and having your private thoughts here, I think even having a look at that will give you some clues about how you can make that conversation better.
Sure. Good stuff. Love it. So let me ask you this, Todd. What's the most important thing you've learned in the process of doing what you've done? Would you say?
Gosh, it's two things I would say.
Okay.
Is
only thing better than one scoop of ice cream is two.
Sorry. Yeah. I like that. If you don't mind, I might steal that.
By all means.
One thing is that when done effectively, these honest conversations there's a very predictable flow of how they go. And the flow goes something like this. And a lot of times, when you discover something, it seems so obvious, honestly. But all good conversations start with a good frame. I mean, people need to talk about what they'd like to talk about and why the other person should care.
Mm-hmm. That makes
Particularly
sense.
when you're talking about something that is going to has the potential to be upsetting, provocative, may create difficult, may create conflict, whatever the reason is. And when you look at all these conversations that people have, most of the time people just simply don't do this. And they simply don't even think about doing it. And so that's almost always the first step. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about and why it's actually worth talking about. And then after that, you've actually got to get other people's views. I know it's obvious, but the tendency is to say, okay, now let me tell you my view on it all. Well, you've already done a good job of framing up the topic. You've probably activated people's minds. Mm-hmm. It's probably not time for you to talk now, right? Because you've activated their minds. So let it come out, whatever you have provoked now, and really hear it out and bottom out their thinking. Because a lot of times when we're listening to what other people are saying, listening is what we do while we wait to talk, right? Mm-hmm. I'm seeing his mouth move. I'm already decided what I'm going to say next. And half of what they're saying, I'm not even hearing. It's just going over my head. So there's this intense listening that's required. In fact, listening is kind of the quiet skill of effective conversations. It's the foundation of everything. And you got to be very tuned into what people are saying. So you have to listen out there, but you also have to listen in here, because there's a small voice in all of our heads that is giving us guidance about where to go in the conversation next. Mm-hmm. And so as you're listening to what people are saying, you're going to have an internal reaction, which could be, I actually don't see it that way. Or, I don't understand that well enough. Can you say more? Mm-hmm. And so you got to hook into that small voice inside of your head. And then at some point you got to, express the truth of what you think about the situation. And the key thing here is not to treat the conversation as an opportunity to kind of win the argument, to be right, not wrong. This is what most people do. If we're not avoiding, we want to get what we want. The key mentality is to treat this interaction between us as a collaborative search for the truth on behalf of trying to make things better. And so when you come from this mindset, so if you frame the conversation properly, if you're truly listening to people properly, if you're expressing yourself in order to figure out with other people what's actually true and therefore what we can do about it, then that almost always makes these difficult conversations much easier and go much better than they otherwise could.
Makes sense.
So that's like how to do it. But the other big thing, when you discover something that will make people more effective in any domain, the next big question is how do you actually develop people in it? Because
sure, how do you actually make it happen?
Well, and so you could read it. So they're going to read the book, right? And what I'm going to try to do that's different from the book, in my book, in our book, is I'm going to try to create a one-stop shop where you can get the best advice and best technique and the best strategies around how to have honest and effective conversations, because that doesn't exist anywhere. Most books, I don't know, you got a story, you got some principles, you got a little bit of tools, but they're mostly, in my mind, a lot of them for marketing purposes, so consultants can sell more business. I actually want to create something that's going to be useful, right?
Yeah.
But as good as it is, knowing something and be able to do it are two very different things.
Totally.
Right. So then so basically what I learned is how to develop this capability in others. And I'm drawing from how I was trained to get better at driving a race car, how I used to train national level martial arts fighters back in the early 90s. It's always about, we've got to recreate the conditions that they're going to be in the real world during the training environment or during the coaching environment. Yep. And most the people in my field, they don't do that. Leadership development worldwide is a $60 billion industry. Okay, this is just corporate leadership development, and the jury's pretty much in on it. It is not producing any significant improvement in organizational effectiveness and business performance. Mm-hmm. And the reason largely is, if you believe Michael Beer, who's this change guru, Harvard Business School professor, is because as soon after these programs are over, people revert back to their old ways of behaving. And I don't think that's actually even true, because if they weren't changed if they weren't changed during the program, there's nothing to revert back to. The fact is, when you go through most leadership development programs or sales training programs, you're not seeing any evidence that people can produce these new behaviors under pressure in the room. So why should you be confident they could do it in real life under real life pressure? So that's what what we figured out, how to recreate the situations very realistically. And then when they then attempt to have the conversation with this, we play the customer, we play the client, we play the person on their team, we play their manager, whomever, we play their colleague. The moment they fall into some trap, we don't just sit back, Josh. 5 minutes later, take some notes, clap, and everybody sits down, because that's not going to make you any better. Nope. The moment somebody falls into this trap, we're going to go, hey, Josh, you know what? You jumped to action too quickly here. You're offering a solution, but there's been no agreement on the problem. Do you see that? You're like, oh, yeah, shit, I do see that. Okay, yeah. So what's your view of the problem? It's this. Okay, say that. Restart the role play. So we're doing kind of helping people catch and convert their behavior in the context of these realistically recreated situations. And so what happens to people is they get very clear on how they need to handle this conversation. They're very confident that they can handle it well, but the repetition of putting them in situations that are very close to what they're going to face in reality with very hands-on coaching in the moment actually helps them short circuit their old patterns and replace them with new, more effective patterns. And that's how you develop real competence. And you close this knowing doing gap under real life pressure by recreating the pressure in the room.
Of course, we have to stimulate it as close to reality as possible, because otherwise you're not building the right skills to actually deal with reality. It totally makes sense. This is exactly what I do when I do my trainings for objection handling.
Is it?
I take and I put an objection in PowerPoint. I stick a microphone in front of somebody's face and say, "What do you say right now? Right now."
That's
and
good.
You're dead.
And when they make an error, what do you do?
Well, what I do is I'll go around the room and I'll get 2 or 3 people, so they have very little time to react, and then I'll tell them what I would say in that situation if I was presented that objection, and I give them why, not only what I would say, but why it matters, and deconstruct the assembly of that. Because one of the crazy things I've learned is that, and you've probably learned this as well, when I was a young guy and I would go try to talk to girls, my friends would tell me what they would say. And I'm like, if I tried to say what you're saying right now, forget getting slapped, I'd be thrown not into prison. I'd be thrown into like a Mexican prison. And yet this guy can go up and say it and I can't pull that line off. And that's the thing. We can't all land the same stuff that other people do because part of it is who it's coming from. It has to be said in our voice and in a place that our body language is going to line up with, that we feel is coming from a place of truth that we genuinely believe. Us believing it is one of the quintessential parts of getting somebody else to believe it. Otherwise, well, maybe you're dealing with being a sociopath because, you can get yourself to believe anything.
But your point is that you're deconstructing it for people so they understand the underlying logic for it, so they can then take this logic and fit it into their personalities.
Absolutely.
See,
absolutely.
And do you have them do a take two?
We'll just take and move on to the next objection because the underlying pieces of it are the same.
You can apply to the next objection,
Exactly.
Yeah, so,
the whole process is taking and figuring out the formula because there's only a handful of objections in my business. There's 6 or 7 of them. That's it. And if you've come up with a solution of one, it's just a matter of customizing what you just said to this new objection. It's that basis that's got to be created.
That's brilliant. It's I'm sorry. I don't mean to say denigrating because I actually think it's like just on the outside looking in as somebody who's very involved and is an advisor to, large companies and small companies that are biotechs around how to design their own developmental programs. This is something I would recommend. It's like good speed dating, totally. And it's super cool. The difference between what I'm doing, there's some similarities, is when we're in the conversation, right, in this kind of real play, maybe is a better way to call it, okay? Sometimes they don't need me to tell them what to say. They already know what to say, but they're not saying it.
Sure.
Right? So It's like I'm avoiding having the conversation with Jeter. So let's say if I was with the coach, say prepping for the conversation with Jeter, maybe they would say, hey, Jeter, do you think there are perhaps any opportunities for you to improve your defense, whatever it is, in the field? And, and he goes, well, what do you mean? And I'd be like, hold on a second here. What are you thinking, man? Well, I'm thinking that I think he's good going left, but he's soft going right. And I got a bunch of tape where I could show that. And I think it's costing us runs, man. And we've lost a couple of games because of it. And sometimes it's just putting too much stress on us to yada, yada, whatever the argument is. I go, then tell him that. So this is the small voice that they're not listening to. They're listening to their fears. They're not listening to their deeper source of wisdom, maybe. And I say, but then I give them a way to channel that. And it's an express structure. So it's say what you think, say why you think it, then ask them what they think about the stuff you just said. Mm-hmm. I know it's simple, but it's very hard for people to do that. So they'll say, well, Jeter, and maybe they won't take my coaching perfectly, but it's fine. I think there's an opportunity for your ability to go right, whatever that is. And I want to talk to you about it because I think we'll probably win more games as a consequence. Is that going to get Jeter's attention? Of course it's going to be, because that guy's a winner through and through. Then he's going to say, well, what do you mean by that? They go, well, then he'll say, you have examples, right? Tell him the examples. Well, on this game, on this game, on this game, and we end up losing 2 runs, and kind of here's what happened. And if you want to sit down, I actually have some tape. I think it's easily fixable, but you got to be convinced it's the right thing. What do you think? He's like, yeah, let's have a look at the tape. It's not a big deal. So a lot of the times, the wisdom is actually inside of them, but they just don't know how to give expression to it, man. Sure. And then sometimes they need me to give what I would say, and like you said, or what my faculty would say, and deconstruct it, because sometimes their thinking needs to get to a higher level as well.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, because I teach such a limited band, I mean, I teach a lot on negotiation. I do. Yeah. I have 3 different 4-hour courses that I've written on it. And the one that we're talking about right now is one specifically on objections, which is kind of a very oddball type of negotiation, because somebody says something to you and you have a few seconds to react. And if you say nothing, you're out. You walk up, you say, hey, I'd like to take and share a drink with you. And she says, I have a boyfriend. You have 2 seconds. and then you're out. Whatever you come up with has got to happen in those next 2 seconds, or
That's
otherwise
right.
you're skulking back to your table. It's an unusual type of negotiation as opposed to like us sitting down and kind of going over with Jeter. So it's this kind of oddball thing that's one, and that's why I brought it up, because it's the class most like what you're talking about, putting people into these real world situations.
Right.
Okay, what do you do? But you're taking it to the conversation level and actually having more of that back and forth, which is
because it's not a 2-second interaction, but what you're doing is ideally suited for that high pressure, short duration interaction.
Yeah.
It sounds
What are you
brilliant,
going to say?
Yeah, it sounds really brilliant.
It's been a popular thing because nobody else that I know of was doing it. But Todd, before we kind of wrap up here, I want to take and maybe let people know you a little bit better.
Sure.
I find that our listeners always want to get to know the people I talk to a little better. So,
all right,
what would you say is the thing that you're most proud of in business that you've accomplished?
I've never been asked that question, and I've never really thought of it because you're so busy just doing
Totally.
it, you know.
Oh, I would suck at this question.
Okay, thank you for making me feel better a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate the question. I think going out on my own.
Yeah.
Actually, I think no, that's not exactly right. You know, I have to listen to my own small voice too, right? We're talking. I know people are listening. Well, hopefully people are listening. You know, I haven't done that many podcasts, you know, and you got to be able to listen to your small voice inside of yourself in that moment, right? And then give expression to it. I think the truthful answer is, and I'm always asking myself, Josh, what's actually true here versus sounds good?
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes if they're both the same thing, that's great. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. You know,
Yeah.
I think I will say, I was part of a previous company and we parted ways. And, you know, I remember, I'm like questioning whether I should say this publicly now, but, you know, all in. And I remember, you know, my clients had heard about it. And I remember saying to them, and I knew I was going to be starting my own firm. And man, it would be a huge deal if those clients came with me. But I didn't want to do anything that smelled like soliciting at all. And I didn't want to solicit. So for me, it was just, I kind of uncomfortable saying this publicly because it feels a little too much like patting myself on the shoulder. But there is this moment where you choose, you know, do you take the higher road or do you not? And I remember saying to them, it's like, listen, yeah. And listen, it's like, I needed the money. I needed clients. I was scared, all of it. And I said to them, listen, if we had to work with each other someday, that would be great. But you know what? You keep working with these folks. I mean, you're in good hands. I wouldn't have been there for 14 years, but for that. And so I was like, I almost kind of need to do it for myself, you know?
Sure.
And then what happened was like a lot of people said, well, the reason that we work there is because of you. Mm-hmm. And it was I remember I was in New Jersey when we were having one of these conversations in a little apartment looking over the Hudson River. And I was like, I think I started crying the first time I heard it because sometimes you lose belief in yourself.
Totally.
You know, and then, you know, it's been the best thing that ever happened to me. And I formed my own company around these ideas. And then it turned out that lots of big clients wanted to work with me, and then faculty wanted to be developed by me and deliver my work, and it happened quite naturally. And so I think I'm probably most proud of those, in some ways, those initial moments when I could have been one person or another person, and I had the ability in that moment. You know, fortunately, I was able to choose a path where I could look back at myself and at least not be ashamed.
Yeah, a path of integrity. Absolutely. No, that's what the study, we talk on this podcast about it all the time. The study of ethics was never the study of the rules. It's the study of how, as a human being, we live a life that we can be proud of in retrospect. Ethics has always been that study.
Thank you for saying that. And because one of the people I'm a huge fan and follower of is Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah,
And
sure.
right, and one of his rules is tell the truth or at least don't lie. And
Hmm.
so what I'm kind of doing in the world is he's inspiring people to do that, and I'm equipping them to do it well, so they don't
Love it.
get beat up and blown up. But the reason I'm saying this to you in response to what you just said, Josh, is I am doing my best to act like the best thing that can happen in life is by expressing the truth of what you think, even if it doesn't feel that way in the short term. It's almost an act of faith. I can't just be one of these consultants who talks a good game about this stuff but doesn't apply it to my
Put
own
it in
life.
practice. Yeah.
So I'm sitting in situations with executive teams, say, for example, because my faculty is training people at the kind of mid and lower levels, but when it's at this like C-suite level, that's what when I'm getting involved. And I'll say it's extremely difficult. And then when I want to challenge the group on how it's behaving, or challenge some individual of the group on how they're behaving in the moment as they're having their discussion around some important business issue, I'm scared to death, honestly,
Sure.
because of course there's the natural people getting upset at you that you want to avoid. I'm just like everybody else in this way. But then also it's like your career, your livelihood, all these other people, my faculty who get work from the work that I do, I can kind of screw the whole thing up, and it's rare. And I've had my fair share of getting blown up by doing just this. Remember, Lewis Hamilton used to say, famous F1 driver, right? Used to say, you never know where the line is until you go past it.
Yep.
So, I mean, I got fired from a job from expressing the truth of what I thought. And when I look back at it, it wasn't that I expressed the truth of what I thought. It was that I didn't do it skillfully enough. And I learned very quickly how to get to the line and walk it and not cross over it. Sure. But even though I guess I have the ability, it's still, in some circumstances, you're still in over your head, Totally. And then what I just think is, well, what do I think is actually true? And then I try to express it in an honest and as compassionate and gracious way that I can. And sometimes it isn't a happy moment for other people, the group, but eventually it's just this funny thing. Something good ends up coming out of it that never could have been possible otherwise. And that's how I'm doing my best to live that way.
I love it,
and to be on the front lines of experimenting with this stuff so I can learn more and then give it to other people, hopefully.
Love it. All right. So if you had to pick, kind of a lightning round here, so just your first take on this.
Okay, good.
What one book or movie would you recommend to the people listening?
That was Josh's way of saying, listen, you're giving very long answers. Can you just keep these short now?
No.
I'm just joking with you, man. It's fine.
All.
I'm a talker, so you know how it is. It's like
no worries. All good. It's all good stuff.
Give it to me again. Book or movie?
What one book or movie would you recommend to our listeners?
The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand.
Fountainhead is a great book and a good movie. Gary Cooper. I've read it and I've seen it.
Movie. But it's nice to see those things on screen. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Book. That book.
A lot not in the movie that was in the book. It's a very book.
If there was a book, I would say The Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay. Good stuff. What famous person in history would you want to meet and have lunch with?
Famous? Has to be famous.
What person in history famous to you?
Well, I mean, if there was somebody that we all know, it would probably be somebody like Lincoln. It would be Lincoln. I wrote a third grade book report on him that I won some like lame third place prize from the Daughters of the American Revolution. That I still remember that. You know what? I'd like to go back in time to meet my grandmother, who I'd like to know her as not being a child, but being an adult, and know her as an adult.
I had somebody come on the other day and say that they would love to have sat down with their father when their father was their age right now.
That's a great answer too. That's
Isn't
fabulous.
it? I've had some really good answers to that question, and it's, you know, as I hear them more and more, I think, because there's thinking about how that would even come back and color the history of our own lives differently. You know, having that sense of our heritage, if you will, you know, who we came from and how they got here, and maybe, you know, how it would color the life lessons that we'd taken from. I know there's a great book written by Larry Elder talking about Dear Father, Dear Son, and that conversation that he'd right in line with what you're talking about. He had this terrible fear of his father, and then he sits down and has one honest conversation with the man, and it completely changes everything.
I remember he told that story. I heard that on a podcast. It was very moving, and for me,
the book is incredible.
It's more like just wanting to know her. She's the same one that I said I didn't like the party because he'd been telling. It was like we called them Nana and Papa, not Grandma and Grandpa, because she kept calling my Papa, my grandfather, an idiot all night. But I had a very, very good relationship with her, and she died of leukemia when I was 13. You know, and never got to know her, and she never got to see me grow up, you know, and I loved her a lot. She loved me, and she was a lovely woman. Okay, what else?
All right, if you had to be stuck in a foxhole taking fire, who would you want to be stuck in that foxhole with?
Olga, the love of my life.
Love it. Yeah. What do you do to unwind, Todd?
I don't do enough.
Okay, not enough.
Not enough, but you know, I have other things that I do. It's like Olga's got this amazing reality show, man, called Olga Knows Best. And where, imagine if like Larry David had a one-night stand with the Kardashians, this reality show would be their love child. And she's an extremely funny character, person. And so I guess, you know, I work with her on that show, and it's not exactly unwinding, but it certainly is like a hell of a lot of fun. And by the way,
unplugging at least.
Yeah, it's it's definitely, or unplugging from this and plugging into something else, maybe is a better way to say that.
Sure. And for some of us, that's exactly what we need, to plug into something else. Being unplugged is not the best. I mean, for me, I have ways of unplugging that still keeps me plugged in and plugging, because that's what makes me
I mean, dude, I have a personal trainer. We do very intense training 3 times a week. So is that unplugging or plugging into something else? You know, both, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's exercising our demons, or whatever the hell you want to call it, that we have to do to take and just sort of put it out there, get us feeling the way we need to. Todd, obviously you're a busy guy. You got a lot going on. What's next for you?
Today? You know, in addition to I'm just doing a lot of things, you know, with my firm. I'm bringing on new faculty in the process, and they're delivering a lot of great work. I'm delivering work as well. Writing this book, it's a weekly thing, and also developing an AI-driven app. Because
Love it.
Because the problem is that, I mean, even if we expand our work significantly, we're still only going to be able to get to not even the 1%, man, the 0.2% of the world, right? Who are going to be able to afford this stuff, right?
Right.
And those are pretty privileged people. I mean, even if you talk a first-line sales manager at a pharmaceutical company, I mean, they're still amongst the elite if you think about it. But what I want to do is make this conversational acumen, the development of it, affordable. So because I've discovered the algorithms of the things that people do that are ineffective, and I've isolated the effectiveness algorithm, so to speak, in these conversations, then you can train a machine to do it.
Yeah.
And then so bring to her any tough conversation you want to have with anyone about anything important, and she will prep you to have it. She'll strategize with you on how to have it, but she's going to recreate the situation you're going to be in, just like we do in our workshops and our coaching, and give you the same catch and convert coaching that you get in the real world, in the virtual world. And this way, you could do this in the flow. We could all do this in the flow of our busy lives, and we can make it available to millions of people. And through that, maybe we're touching 1 billion conversations every year. And
Nice.
what I'm going to do is make it free for people who buy the book, which will come out in about no more than 15 months from now, maybe about 13 months from now, as a way to, give it exposure, give it some sunlight. So that's a big part of what I'm working on.
That's a great project to be. I knew there had to be one in there. I knew it. I knew there had to be one.
Thanks. I'm glad you asked. I forgot to mention it. So
no, it's all good. It's all good. All right. Last question, Todd. Where can folks that want to know more about what you're doing find you?
Well, first of all, if your audience wants those free resources, again, there's that web address that I gave. Sorry, I didn't have it memorized, but holzman.com/getting-to-candor. But they can also go to my website, which is holzman.com. That's simple. So HOLZMAN.com.
Good stuff. Well, Todd, thank you so much for your time and for this really honest conversation about honesty and candor in conversation. It was very enjoyable. So thank you.
Totally my pleasure, Josh. Thank you. Anytime.
All right. To everybody listening, thanks for listening once again, and reminding you it's always mission critical, mission important. You got to do it. You got to know your shit. Till next time, guys.